So will the government's announcement yesterday that Huawei is going to play a limited role in the UK's 5G network damage relations with the United States, which warned against it? Joining me now is the former Conservative Foreign Office and Defence Minister Harriet Baldwin and the Labour MP Stephen Kinnock. Welcome to you both.
I'm a former minister.
Former
I'm not
minister,
one
yeah.
anymore.
Well,
no.
you never know. There's going to be a reshuffle soon. Now, what about the impact of this Huawei decision on the relationship with the United States? I mean, Pompeo and Trump have been pretty clear they didn't want this decision.
Well, this is a very, very strong relationship, the special relationship. And as you know, Mike Pompeo is here today. And I understand the Prime Minister called President Trump yesterday to reassure him that, first of all, there were not going to be any changes in terms of the secure parts of our communications network. Secondly, that there's going to be a cap in terms of Huawei's involvement. And thirdly, that we were going to work together to find a way to manage to reduce the market share of what have been described as these, what's the technical phrase they use, non-compliant competitor or something like that. So I think that it's a very strong relationship. This has clearly been something that we've worked closely with them on, and I hope that they are reassured in terms of the approach that the UK government's decided to take.
I mean, geopolitical terms, you slightly welcome the fact that this is a bit of a pushback against the Trump administration?
I find it very worrying from the point of view of the Chinese regime. It's an authoritarian regime. Huawei has very close links to the Chinese government. And it seems bizarre to me that the Conservatives, who've been arguing for so long about taking back control from Brussels, are now going to hand control to Beijing. What I think it shows is we've had a complete failing of an industrial strategy in this country. We should be developing this technology ourselves, but instead we just outsource this to various countries who potentially could be a fox in the hen coop in terms of our own security. Our national security should not be for sale, and it does feel like that yesterday that's what happened.
Are we handing control to Beijing?
But is that the Labour position, that you would not have taken this stance? I mean, I was unsure when I listened to the Labour front bench the other day as to what the Labour position was. But I do agree with Stephen that I do think this is a wake-up call in terms of industrial strategy. I think we're in a position now we can take some long-term decisions. We're leaving the European Union on Friday. We can start developing our own independent trade policy in the world. And I do think, from an industrial point of view, this is an area where we need to make steps forward here in the UK.
Well, you've had 10 years to do it.
But I mean, is that industrial policy basically working much more closely with the Chinese? I mean, after all, David Cameron talked about a golden era of relations. Is that what, outside the European Union, is that what we have to do now?
I think it's making sure that the UK does have the right sovereign capabilities. So I think there will be areas where we can be very open in terms of our stance with the world. But I think, you know, as I recall from when I was in charge of defence procurement, there are certain areas where obviously we make sure that there's a very secure supply chain. And I think it's, as we move into the whole defence and security review, making sure that those sovereign capabilities and, importantly, the sovereign capabilities that we're going to need in the future. And I'm thinking about battery supply chains. I'm thinking about some of the minerals that go into those batteries. You know, there are some very important long-term strategic decisions that we need to make sure to make the UK safe and secure for decades to come.
Do you think we are going to have to choose sides vis-a-vis China?
Look, I think we're living in a tripolar world. United States, China and the European Union. In the United States, you have a deeply unpredictable, irrational president. In China, you have an authoritarian regime that does not share our values of democracy and the rule of law. And then you have an alliance of democracies on our doorstep. It's absolutely vital that we stay closely aligned with that alliance of democracies, because it's a very dangerous and turbulent world out there. I think we are now heading into a period where we've got Brexit, and absolutely no thought has been given by this government to having a national strategy.
On China, for example, there isn't a common European position. Different countries have different attitudes.
No, but the EU frequently speaks out on human rights, for example, in China, and the British government has aligned itself with the European Union. That's been a pillar of our foreign policy, defence of values of free trade, democracy and the rule of law. Those are the values of the European Union. So, I regret that we didn't stay more closely aligned and that we are now in a position where we don't know yet which pole of influence we're going to ally ourselves with. But for me, the choice is absolutely clear. When you look at what's happening in Washington right now and you look at where Beijing is coming from, it's absolutely clear where we should be putting our support.
Leaving the European Union doesn't change our values and our value for human rights around the world, but it does give us more freedom to make some strategic choices. But I do think at the heart of all those strategic choices has got to be what's in the national interest, in the UK's national interest, and we've got more flexibility as far as that is concerned.
But
Friday.
We've stuck with European Union on Iran as well. Are we just going to discover that reality is, whether we're inside or outside the European Union, we are a European nation and those are our closest allies?
Well, I think that there's a very important role that we can continue to play working with the European Union. We will just be doing it as a sovereign state alongside the European Union, as opposed to being legally part of its structures. But I don't think that in any way diminishes, in fact, it increases our scope for articulating those values around the world. But I do think that at the heart of the freedoms that we will have as of Friday is making sure that we keep the UK's security at the absolute centre of thinking long term.
And where does the United States fit into all this?
The United States is an absolutely crucial ally, obviously through NATO, where, we are both countries that spend more than 2% on our national defence. We have an incredibly close relationship in terms of Five Eyes and security and intelligence sharing that benefits all of us. And I think we've also got, as a result of leaving the European Union, the ability to set our own trade policy with the United States, which for British businesses, for British farmers, will enable them to access the US market, the enormous US market, with lower tariffs.
And where do you see our relationship with the United States now?
Well, we're dealing with the United States that assassinated Soleimani without even making a call to Britain about keeping our own troops safe in the case of retaliation. A United States that is preventing the extradition of Ansu Khalis. A United States that is out of step with us on this tech tax. So, and an irrational president sitting in the White House. So I think that we need... You can't really draw a difference between interests and alliances. In order to project your interests in the world, you have to have a strong set of allies in this very integrated and globalized world that we live in. So first of all, the government needs to decide where its key allies are. And then you can begin to project your interests and your values accordingly. As things stand, it feels like we are flailing around. We're in great danger of being completely isolated and left out in the cold unless we make some very important and tough strategic choices urgently.
OK, thank you both very much indeed. Thank you.